wollen, genau.
Ich bekomme ein zustimmendes Nicken ausgezeichnet. Das freut mich sehr. Ausgezeichnete Frage. Mit der Software, die ist gerade kann ich so rudimentär machen. Mit der eigenen Software kann ich komplett verwalten.
Okay. So I'd like to welcome you to our next session. This is a session in English, not in German anymore, because we are like international experts on standardization who are here at the panel. And as you all heard, the missing link or the key to success are international standards or interoperability between software systems. So we will talk the next 45 minutes about this issue, and I really welcome you to ask questions. Please ask us about projects, about money, about how to achieve, to work with a new technology, and about the community who is meeting in Amsterdam the next few days. I hope there's somebody going to the Dev Days. Is there somebody going to the Dev Days in Amsterdam? Yeah, great. I think you know that this is not only like a very cool community, but they have a high expertise on the healthcare system and on IT. And this is what we need right now in Germany, in my opinion. First of all, Simone Heckmann will give us a short introduction to FHIR. And Simone is a dear friend of mine. She's in HL7 at the board, and she's the lead of the technical committee for FHIR, for the whole FHIR community. She has a medical background, and she works right now for a company within this field. So you can give us a few words on FHIR, please.
Thank you, Silvia. I would like to introduce the FHIR standard through a couple of statements about this standard. First of all, that statement may come surprising to some of you and not to others. FHIR is an HL7 standard. That's important to note because some people think that FHIR and HL7s are two completely different things, that HL7 are the old standards that we used to have, like version 2, and FHIR is the new thing that has nothing to do with it, but actually FHIR is a product of the HL7 family, so it's basically a sibling to the older standards like version 2 and CDA and version 3. Then again, it's not quite yet a standard. When we look at the FHIR timeline, you will note that since 2011 there has been a lot of development. We have had a couple of releases of this standard, but we are still a standard for trial use. So the normative edition of FHIR is expected by the end of this year. So we are really almost there, but not quite yet. One statement is FHIR is a link. And that's obvious when we look at the projects that are out there. FHIR, for example, is a link that has enabled Apple to build this awesome application that gives patient access to their health information on their phones, and that is powered through the FHIR API. FHIR is also the backbone technology for the SMART framework, which enables web-based applications to enrich the functionality of EHR systems, so you can build these apps into your EHR system. Then we have the CDS hooks framework, which is a standardized way to integrate clinical decision support services into your primary systems based on an international standard. Also, we have a framework which is also developed on FHIR. It's Sync for Science. It allows patients to share their data with scientists and scientific studies. Last part where FIRE is a link is between the application world and the world of terminology. FIRE has an integrated terminology framework, and you can see it in real life, like the LOINC standard, for example, has now only recently exposed their terminology through a FIRE front end. So it's going to be able for application vendors to integrate terminologies using the same standards that they use to integrate with other systems. The next statement is that FIRE has been missing. And that becomes clear when you look at all the places where FIRE has already been adopted. For example, from government agencies around the world. Tech giants like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, Oracle, they already committed to using and adopting the FIRE standard for healthcare interoperability. We have the healthcare vendors all over the world, especially in the US, that have started to develop applications with FIRE front ends. And we have IHE. And I have a quote here, which is from an IHD profile, which is based on FIRE, which says, whenever possible, IHE profiles are based on established and stable underlying standards. However, if an IHE committee determines that an emerging standard offers significant benefits for the use cases it's attempting to address, it may develop IHE profiles based on such a standard. And you will see that apparently the IHE committee sees a lot of significant benefits in FIRE, because right now we already have 25 FIRE-based IHE profiles, and there are a lot more in the making. This might create a bit of controversy, but that's what we're here for after all. I would like to put out the statement that FIRE is not an interoperability standard. It's a technology. And that's all it is. Sorry. I mean, if you came here expecting that FIRE is going to solve all of our interoperability problems, it will not. Because there's still one missing ingredient. And the question is, what is this magic sauce that turns technology into operability? And it's basically consensus. So if we want to be interoperable, we have to have some sort of consensus, either on an international level, on a national level, on a domain level, or even within one organization on what data we want to exchange, how we want to represent and encode this data, and what the purpose of our interoperability is supposed to be. What FIRE is an awesome tool to turn consensus into interoperability. That's what FIRE is doing for us. But consensus has to be there first, and FIRE can be the technology to create interoperability from consensus. For example, FIRE allows us to do this. We can take a condition resource, like it is specified in the FIRE standard, to to exchange diagnoses about a patient, and we can put a profile on top of this with constraints that explain how to use this resource in a specific context. For example, we have a US profile right here which declares the required fields, it sets the minimum cardinalities of the fields, and it declares the terminology bindings on how to represent coded information. When I said that FIRE is just a technology, that was actually a lie. It is not. It is a lot more than that, because FIRE is also a community. And community is the tool that we use to create consensus, which is the basis for all the next steps. FIRE community is happening mostly on the international FIRE chat, so there's no barrier to enter this community. You don't have to be a member of HL7. You don't have to have a job where you get the funding to travel to workgroup meetings. You don't even have to have a job. If you want to join this community, you can sign up. You can do it literally right now on your smartphone. You can go to chat.fire.org, create a free account, and you're already in the FIRE community. You can discuss, you can ask questions, you can ask help from other implementers, and you can get in contact with people who are using the same standards and may have the same questions and problems like you do. And this is what happens when you don't sign up on this chat for a couple of days. You see hundreds of unread messages. Right now we have an average of 300 messages per day going over this chat, and we have an average of 800 active members in this community. And I really mean active members. That's not listing the thousands of others who are using this just to read up and to research and to find answers to their questions, but don't actually dare to speak out themselves. So if you are among the happy few who get the funding to travel to community events like the January Connectathon in New Orleans, this is what the kind of people that you're going to meet. So that was the Fire Connectathon in January, just to give you an idea of the scale of how many participants we have at such events. And this is a picture from last year's Dev Days. As Sylvia already mentioned, they are happening the day after tomorrow. So if you have any questions you want to ask about fire, you have to do it on this session, because by tomorrow, every fire expert will be gone. They will all be racing off to Amsterdam. If you want to join there too, if you think it's a good idea to travel to Amsterdam tomorrow and see what it's all about, you're unfortunately out of luck because the event has been sold out for a couple of weeks now. So, but we are looking very much forward to this. It's a highlight of the year for people in the fire community. So feel free to join us using the chat, or just ask any questions that you would like to ask during this session. Thank you.
Thank you. So, are there already any questions to Simone Heckmann? She's our fire expert at LZ7, Germany. Okay. So let's go to our first speaker here. This is Frank Oemich. He has a PhD in medical informatics, and he's right now a senior e-health architect at Deutsche Telekom Healthcare and Security Solution. So I have one question for you, Frank. Do we still need version 2 and version 3 and the CDA, the clinical documentation architecture, if we have fire?
Complicated question, simple answer, yes. And that's quite easy because, for example, if you're talking about V2 messaging, so that's a standard which is used worldwide, and I guess that's the one which is overall every other standard, even above fire, because fire is just recently coming up as a new standard, and as we have heard, it's not a real standard right now, it's still under development. But we have, I don't know how many millions of transactions in V2 today, and maybe also per hour, I don't know. So that's something you cannot stop. So at least not for the next decade, and maybe even for 20 years now, it will go on. And we have to keep track and further develop V2. So we will do that, for example, to modernize and refactor V2 so that we are using the same technical terminology, and it will look totally different to what you are aware of today. So, so that's a good thing with V2. The same for CDA, maybe not version 3. I guess version 3 is with the rise of fire, I guess, outdated because it's much too complicated. So fire has taken all the lessons learned and built it into a new standard. But what we are using in healthcare is a set of documents. And right now, CDA is the one which you can use for quite a lot of different purposes. We have created a lot of implementation guides, the discharge letter, referral letter. We have different kind of reports, pathology report. We have infectious disease reporting, etc. We have a lot of standards which are in use, and which are using then CDA as the base standard. So that's something you cannot get rid of as well. And what we also need is a mapping in between, because if you're collecting all the data for fire services, for example, you will do that by V2 messaging, and you will also use that information to create documents. So we need this integration of all three, and I guess that's what we are working on, and the expectation is that we will keep that for many, many years.
Yeah, I think the key phrase here is to never touch a running system. And I think V2, wherever it is working right now, it is doing its job pretty good. So let's just not touch it. I'm pretty sure that V2 messaging is going to be around in 10 years and even after that. I think for fire, it's more important right now to to be around or to develop in the places where we do in fact have a missing link, like like integrating web application, mobile application, integrating the patient, integrating cloud-based services into our EHR. That's where V2 doesn't really cut it. That's too outdated and not supporting the requirements for web-based applications. So that's where FHIR is going to be first. And to replace V2 messaging is probably the very, very last thing that FHIR should do.
Okay, thank you. My next question is to Lilian Minne. She's a FHIR consultant at Furore from the Netherlands, and she has her PhD degree from in medical informatics from the University of Amsterdam. And I have one question to you. You are from the Netherlands, and as we all know, the Netherlands is far beyond Germany, not behind, beyond. So, ahead is the right semantic word. So, which kind of projects are right now in the Netherlands that are dealing with FHIR?
Yes. So in the Netherlands, we have a national program running from MHITF, from the government. It's called the MHITF program. And the goal of this program is that every Dutch citizen has access to his or her healthcare data from 2020. And to do so, they have to be able to access it through a personal health environment. And the program doesn't prescribe how the personal health environment is built, but it does prescribe the data that should be in there, in which format it should be in there, so that patients can upload it from one hospital and they can send the data to another hospital. So there's a couple of principles in this program: that the patient is the owner of this data, and they should be able to exchange this data in a safe and user-friendly way. And there should be a choice of IT vendors. So the patient should be able to choose, I want a personal health environment from Apple or Google or whatever. And they should all be able to connect to the same system, to the same standards. And for the technical standards, they are using FHIR now. Then there's other programs running in the Netherlands to define a common set of healthcare data. These are called the healthcare information models. And what NICTIS did is they translated these healthcare information models to FHIR profiles. So, for example, we have the clinical model for an encounter, and then we translate it to the FHIR profile of encounter.
Okay. Sorry? Okay.
I think the interesting thing to note is that in the places where we see FHIR in action right now, like the Netherlands and the US, these are exactly the places where consensus has been created long time before. You already had your clinical models. You only needed to translate them into FHIR. Also in the US, there was also the common clinical data set, and all they had to do was to translate it into FHIR resources. And I think that's for Germany, that's the missing link right here. We don't have this common clinical model, this common consensus of understanding of what our data in healthcare is supposed to look like. If we had this, it would be so easy to translate it into FHIR and say, here you go, interoperability standard out of the box. But we don't. And I think that's going to be the biggest problem for Germany to solve.
But they are, okay.
Yeah, there's also another missing link, is that there should also be a motivation to implement these standards in the hospitals. And what they also did in the Netherlands is they said, the government, okay, if you implement this, then you get funding for it. And we will do an audit if you implemented it in the correct way. And after this audit, then you get the funding. So not on beforehand, but afterwards.
again, same in the US, through the Meaningful Use program, there are incentives connected to the implementation of the interoperability standards. And since January this year, there's a requirement in the US to implement FHIR interfaces to be applicable for meaningful use incentives. So it is estimated that by next year, 85% of all hospitals in the US will have FHIR interfaces.
But there are some projects in Germany as well. I work at the Charité right now, and there's a nephrologist who does kidney surgery on children, and he gives the children smartphones, and the application is based on FHIR, and he then can see how the children are doing after having surgery. So first implementations are there, and the next huge implementation will be within the Medical Informatics Initiative from our Ministry of Science. And within this very huge project where we connect 33 university hospitals in Germany, we decided to use SNOMED CT, LOINC and FHIR to have our basic architecture and to exchange data with FHIR and with these semantic terminologies. So our next guest is Alexander Eels. We know each other since 4 years from our time back
we are not so old.
Oh, okay. Time back in Aachen, where there was the first IHE Connectathon in Germany. And since then, Alexander Eels is involved in IHE. He was the vendor chair or co-chair, and now he is manager strategic business development healthcare at InterSystems and member at large in the IHE International Board. So, and I like to ask you, what should we do with IHE right now? We listened to the politicians in the last session that everything should be based on IHE, and now we hear something about FHIR, and does it fit together, or do we fight against each other, or do we like each other, or does one standard need the other one? Alexander.
I think we like each other. And Simone pointed out very clearly that IHE started several years ago by defining profiles based on the FHIR standard. On the very early versions we started. Now we are in the version 3, and we go on with that. And that's not enough. We also created from an international level a new project together with HL7 called Gemini, that tries to enforce these developments on FHIR that are used in IHE profiles. And why IHE profiles based on FHIR? I think the key message is what Simone said, is consensus. We need consensus. And what IHE can give to the FHIR standards, or can give to as an add-on to FHIR, is this consensus. We can, together with the users, define the consents about why should we use FHIR in what way. And more IHE has a development over the made a development over the last decade, that we came a lot from workflow profiles, went over to infrastructure profiles, and now more and more we come to content profiles. Content where we need a consensed content, where we need to define what data should I transport in this or that case from A to B. And exactly at that point, I think it's a very good combination to combine the communities. On one hand, the IHE community that is nearly by 50% also supported by user organizations, and combine that with a technical standard of FHIR and with the technical ideas, because then I think we have a combination where we can very quickly implement or make specifications for implementation of the FHIR standards, not only on international level, but also to give the guidance for the national levels, like in the Netherlands or in Germany, what we will see in the next years.
I think also that FHIR gives IHE a whole new leverage, I would say, because IHE profiles in the past, they used to be published as PDFs only, and all the constraints, all the rules that you had to implement to be compliant with this profile had to be basically typed off of a PDF document. With FHIR, IHE has now the opportunity to publish their rules in a machine-readable way, so that whoever implements that can basically import these set of rules into their own program. You can instantly validate any instance you create against that profile, and you automatically get the human-readable documentation from it. I think that's a big benefit for an organization like IHE to be able to publish their profiles in a machine-readable way.
Well, that's not quite correct. So sorry for interrupting, but we have this notion that we can publish profiles in a technical way in XML, etc. So that's something we do with IHE as well. So that's something you can download from Gazelle, also for V2, and that's something FHIR has inherited from V2. So the notions, the ideas of what is a profile, how to work with profile. So then we have to talk about conformance and compliance, so that you are doing it in the correct way. But FHIR is raising that to the next higher level, I would say, because we are not only publishing it, we have more tools, we have free libraries, we have everything, we have the community, and from that perspective, we should not forget that the profiling is the most important part here. And that goes back to two issues then, and I guess that's not stressed enough. So one is what Dennis said, well, we have models, yes. So the Zorg Informatie Baustein, I guess it's called in the Netherlands, ZIBS, so zibs.nl, take a look and you will find out for yourself. So that's the most important part, and that's also the reason why IHE was founded, because of the different information models behind V2 and DICOM. And that's something you have to keep in mind, so that we need this information models, a set of information models, and in order to establish that, we need a community. FHIR has this community, and I guess that's a missing point, a missing link here in Germany. So if we are hearing from our previous speakers, well, we are taking international standards and that's it, I would like to be a little bit opposed to say that, because what we need is, yes, we need the international standards, of course, but we need the processes around it. How to work with standards, to make it a standard. So it's not just taking something and, well, that's it, but we need the community to define those standards. So that's, in my opinion, the most important part, that we are doing it together. And that's why we are sitting here and can talk to each other, because everybody has learned the same. And that's something which is still missing for healthcare. And that's something we also have to learn, I would say.
So, one second. And who is the community? Who? Is this the KBV or are this the insurance companies?
That was exactly the thing I wanted to add. When you remember the discussion before our discussion here, there was also a little bit here and there who will be the one in Germany who decides what standards and in what kind of profile of the standards shall be used. This is the wrong discussion. What we saw here in the keywords from Simone is FHIR is an open community, and standards can only be developed and only be defined in an open community where everybody can discuss, where everybody can bring in his or her ideas to the standards, to the implementation of the standards, to the profiling of the standards. And this is something what all organizations, nevertheless, whether it's HL7 or DICOM or IHE or others like PCHA, is the same. The same minded story is that we are open and we allow everybody to discuss with us how is the right way to do it in our different standards and in our different profiles. What we can't have is a governance structure where somebody in a closed room decides, and this is the standard for this country. We will not be successful with this approach.
And who should be within the community of specifying medical content?
The doctors, of course.
And who is a doctor in Germany, or where is an organization that represents doctors?
These are the so-called Fachgesellschaften, the societies, the doctor societies, because they are in charge to define also the Leitlinien, the pathworks that they want to use, And so these are the natural organizations to define what should be transported, transferred in what use case. And then the specialists from the standardization bodies and the specialists from industry and others can then help them to formulate the right usage of the standards to fulfill their requirements.
So a patient summary of an oncologist should be different to a patient summary of from a child.
Diabetes, yeah.
Yeah.
Of course they are, but the important thing is that through the usage of these international standards, we can ensure that in the patient summary from the oncologist, a blood pressure measurement is the same like represented as in a patient summary for a diabetes doctor. Yeah? That's the important thing. Therefore, our community can help to standardize all this. But the definition, what must be the content, the consents in such documents must come from the doctor societies.
From the scientific doctor societies and not only from the KBV or Bundesärztekammer, because these are political organizations. How about in the Netherlands? How do you work with the societies together?
Well, there are different working groups with physicians and as well for the academic hospitals. But then there's the complaint from the regular hospitals that not everything is the same, because an academic hospital is very different from a regular hospital. So we also have these kind of problems, that who's deciding what will be the standard, because this works for them, but does it work for everyone? So we do have these kind of problems.
I think in the end, we should not forget the implementers. The implementers are also a very important part in this game, because most of the time they have been on the receiving end of all these requirements from doctors from different domains, and they have spent years probably trying to make a model out of that, trying to get this all to make it implementable, to have these special cases for all these different doctors from different domains, but still have a consistent back end that it's possible to maintain. And I think that's the experience that we need in this community, and that implementers in everywhere in all these companies that are presenting right here have gathered over many, many years. And I think that in the past, the implementers haven't really gotten to be a part in this. They always had to wait until the specification was ready, and then it was handed to them, and then they had to make some sense of it and had to implement it. But I think they should be at the table also, because eventually it's the implementers who decide whether the standards will be developed or not. If it's considered too complex or not implementable or not representing the real life, it will be too expensive to implement, and that's usually the killer that prevents standards from being implemented in reality. So if an implementer says, yeah, that's something that I can do, that's something that we can maintain, that makes sense to me, then it will be implemented. So I think the implementer should play an important part, and I think that's something that the FIRE community does very well, to really include the implementers from the very first step. We've had connectathons already, even after the first draft of the specification was out. There were already implementers at the table trying to put this into usable prototypes and to see whether the specification would fit in with the real world.
Okay, talking about implementation, so how can we help Vivi, Technica, AOK with their patient summaries? We heard from one person from the last panel that there are European standards, there is an international patient summary on ISO level and on HL7 level, and we had this project EPSOS within the European community, where we decided and harmonized a patient summary. Could this be the success for all our different patient summaries? I imagine that there are about 30 around in Germany right now, not only these 3 that I mentioned. So how can we go on with this, and how can we help the politicians and our Selbstverwaltung?
I think the important thing is that we need an organization in Germany that looks at the work that is done in the communities, that looks at the work that is done in the standardization area, and then makes decision on the national level, like NICTIS in the Netherlands, like ELGA in Austria, like EL Swiss in Switzerland, and a lot of other examples are in the world out there. In Germany, we don't have this organization yet. We have Gematik, but that's part of the organization of the so-called Selbstverwaltung of the doctors and hospitals in Germany. And they are not representing the whole German healthcare business. So we need that organization. It can be a very small one. We don't need a huge approach with a new Bundesamt that declares that all. And it's not only done when we have such an maybe agile organization. It must use, also this organization, a transparent process. It must be clear for everybody why a decision came to that or this. And only then, also what Simone said, we can include the implementers and we can catch them and can force them to implement it very early because they find themselves in the specification.
So one last question before we have another round of questions from the audience. Frank, in Berlin, everybody is talking about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so on, big data, smart data, and is there a relationship to fire and all these words that are like at the Digitalgipfel and in the scientific community?
Well, I guess you can make use of it or combine both, so why not? So the keyword is that we will get structured information. So right now artificial intelligence is used to extract information from documents, etc. So to analyze a physician letter which is written in Word or any other text processing software and then print it into PDF and to extract the information out of it. Well, yes, that's something you can do, and it's getting easier if we are migrating to FHIR, and we will also get new types of systems, new architectures, because we have new means we can use. So that's great, and I guess also artificial intelligence will be beneficial to the use of FHIR and maybe also vice versa. But on the other hand, we should not forget that AI is not extracting information like with big data processing. Is quite the same. You need to know what you are looking for. So otherwise, you cannot make use of it. And therefore, we have to be very aware on how to incorporating artificial intelligence here.
Actually, Google is using FHIR data models or basically a FHIR infrastructure to feed data, healthcare data into their machine learning algorithms. So they have been looking for a universal format to normalize all the data they get from different sources and to feed it into machine learning algorithms. And they found that FHIR was basically the missing link for them. So they implemented their machine learning algorithm based on FHIR. They also developed their own serialization of the FHIR data model in protobuf, which is something that Google uses internally to process big data. And they have also made that available as open source tooling for the community. So anyone who wants to do big data stuff with FHIR and needs a very efficient representation that's quickly to parse and easy to process and billions of data can basically use the protobuf implementation that Google has made available.
Last answer from me to that question. Artificial intelligence has a huge potential to help in medicine, but let me say it like this. We should think about using artificial intelligence when we have enough human intelligence to define a German data model, and then we can start with artificial.
One step at a time.
Yes. So are there any questions?
Not all at once.
So who works with FHIR here? Oh, wow, okay.
Well, I have less a question, more a statement. My name is Axel Braun. I'm supporting the GNU Health project here, which is a free health and hospital information system. As a free project, we're of course adhering to open standards, so we are already supporting HL7 FHIR. And to our understanding, any money, any software built with public money should also result in public code. That means on the one hand it should be an open software. If I look, for example, at the last presentation, we had this Vivi tool. Right after Vivi was released, it pointed out that it's exchanging huge amounts of data with third parties in foreign countries, and this is only possible if you have a closed source. So this is something that cannot be, and it's not protecting the user's security. Last point. If the public money goes into the public code, it should as well go into international open standards, and this is why you are having our support in using HL7 Fire. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the important part to mention here is that the FIRE community is also an open source community. We do have multiple open source projects running. We do have a Java reference implementation that's out there, that's free to use, that's open source, and maybe Lilian can say a bit of stuff about the .NET implementation? About the .NET implementation?
Yes.
Open source.
Yeah. Also, the .NET API is completely open source, and implementers can use that to connect to Fire.
But the only thing that is not open source is the terminology that we need, especially SNOMIT-CT, because Germany is not yet a member of the organization that owns SNOMIT-CT, but the Netherlands, Spain, Australia, and many, many countries.
Pretty much everyone else.
No, that's not right. Just 35 countries in the world, but the big ones and the other ones get it for free are members of the IHTSTO, the organization, and we need this membership very much, and the Medical Informatics Initiative showed that we need it, but our Ministry of Health doesn't really decide to do so. That is a pity, and I hope we come a step forward after all this political decisions that has to be made the next.
Yeah, but that's clear. If you don't have a decision what data should be transported, you don't need terminologies.
So, and if you don't know what to transport, there's no secure way to transport it. So, okay. This is our issue, and it will be our issue in the next years, I think. And hopefully here are many vendors who really badly need it, and to write letters to our government and say, please decide on these very, very important steps towards international standards.
I think FIRE will enable a lot of really, really awesome projects to go into production really soon, like in the US or in the Netherlands or in any country that has their data model figured out. And I think that will probably get us some encouragement. If we see what's possible with the technology that we have, if we can create that part of consensus, I think that will drive the development in Germany more than any politician or anyone else can. Because I don't think that patients will understand why, when they go to other countries, they suddenly have access to everything. They can review the information on their phone. They can set the alerts of when their medication needs to be taken, and it's all working. And when they come back to Germany, it suddenly doesn't. As well as the doctors will not understand why they can simply plug in different apps into their EHR system when they're working in the US, and when they come back to Germany they can't. They will not understand that. So I think that both the group of the users of our application, both patients and doctors, will in the future no longer accept that Germany is lagging behind with these other countries.
By the way, did we answer the question if somebody from US where we can use SNOMED for free is traveling to Germany with their app and entering their data, whether that's allowed, because they are in a foreign country and we do not have this license. So did we answer that? But well, let's go back, I guess. The important thing is we are saying, well, let's use international standards. So the primary question is, who is making international standards? It's we. Because every country is doing that. And what's missing for me is the German contribution to international standards. So we have different things. So like terminology, so that's the last topic. We should also mention that we are now renovating the way we are working with terminology in HR7. So here in Germany, we do not even know what a real code system is and how to maintain that. So that's something we still are discussing. So in US, we have clarified this question, and we are now migrating to combine all the terminology we are using in the standards, at least within the different HL7 families. So this universal terminology governance project is doing that, so that we are getting everything closer together. And we should also mention, for example, that we need, for working with terminology, that we also need some kind of governance. So HTA, for example, is one of these organizations who is doing that, and Sylvia is not only nominated but awarded by becoming a member to this board, so that we have influence. And that's something we should keep in mind when we are saying we want to work with international standards, so that what we are doing in the end is controlling what they are doing, so that it is coming back to our country in return. And that's, I guess, the most important point. So that's not dictated from other countries, but contributed by us.
I think that's an important point about FIRE. I think FIRE is often seen as an American standard, as a US standard that is kind of swapping over into the European countries, but it's definitely not. The only reason why FIRE is often associated with being something from the US is because it's most of the implementation is happening right there, but it's mostly to do with the meaningful use program and the incentives and all the governance behind that. That's not really some meaning that the standard is being created in the US. In fact, the three founding members of the FIRE standards are three guys from the Netherlands, from Australia, and from Canada. And most of the FIRE, of the HL7 working groups that are developing the standards are really a mixture from all over the world. And the standard also has a very open process. So if you find that there's something wrong with the FIRE standard because it doesn't fit your implementation, you can go to a web page, sign up there, and you can enter a change request. And the change request will be treated, and you will get a feedback from the working group. You will get a reason why your change request maybe has been denied, because maybe there's a better solution to that, or it has been not put into the standard for a reason, or your change request might very well pass, and you will find your changes that you requested in the next release of the FIRE standard. So this is a very open process, and pretty much anyone can become a part of the community and subsequently also enter their own change requests if they feel that there's something missing.
One last question, one last round. So, Alexander, do you think is FIRE a disruptive technology?
No, it's not disruptive, but it may disrupt some businesses. But the technology is a good technology, and the technology does not disrupt any other technology. Yes, I think in the near and wider future, we will see that companies that ignore these developments and that ignore this upcoming new standard will get in trouble. And yes, then at the end, the answer must be yes. It can be disruptive to companies, to countries, but it's not disruptive as a technology.
How disruptive is it in the Netherlands?
I think FIRE in itself is not disruptive, but I think actually the bigger high-tech companies and the startup companies are the ones that are disrupting healthcare at the moment. And what they needed was a health API, and that is exactly what FIRE offers. And so it offers a tool to disrupt for the bigger companies. And I also think another reason to adopt FIRE as a national standard is to make your market attractive to these kind of companies, because otherwise you will miss out in the future.
Do we want to have an attractive market in Germany, Frank?
I hope so. So FIRE is modern, new, hip, hype, whatever you like. So it's not a solution, it's a tool to make solutions, and that's something we have to keep in mind. Our healthcare system is complex, so we need a lot of brains to solve this complexity, and that's what I invite you. Let's do that together.
Chat.fire.org.
Thank you.
Join now.
Join now. Thanks to all and to the audience, to our speakers, and hopefully we'll see each other next year or within the next year.